Cato the Younger, from Plutarch's Lives, translated by John Dryden, revised by Arthur Hugh Clough. A considerable body of horse, which had escaped from the late fight, riding up towards Utica, sent 3 men before to Cato, who yet did not all bring the same message, for one party was for going to Jubba, another for joining with Cato, and some again were afraid to go into Utica. When Cato heard this, he ordered Marcus Rubrius to attend upon the 300 and quietly take the names of those of their own accord set the slaves at liberty, but by no means to force anybody. Then, taking with him the senators, he went out of the town and met the principal officers of these horsemen, whom he entreated not to abandon so many Roman senators, not to prefer Jubba for their commander before Cato, but to consult the common safety, and to come into the city, which was impregnable and well furnished, with corn and other provisions. Now, they don't mean, when we say corn, they mean kernels of grain, probably like barley or spelt or something, sufficient for many years. The senators likewise with tears besought them to stay. Hereupon the officers went to consult their soldiers, and Cato with the senators sat down upon an embankment, expecting the resolution. In the meantime comes Rubrius in great disorder, crying out. The 300 were all in commotion, and exciting revolt and tumult in the city. At this all the rest fell into despair. Lamenting and bewailing their condition, Cato endeavored to comfort them, and sent to the 300, desiring them to have patience. Then the officers of the horse returned with no very reasonable demands. They said they did not desire to serve Jubba for his pay, nor should they fear Caesar while they followed Cato, but they dreaded to be shut up with the Uticans, men of traitorous temper and Carthaginian blood. For though they were quiet at present, yet as soon as Caesar should appear, without doubt they would conspire together and betray the Romans. Therefore, if he expected that they should join with him, he must drive out of the town or destroy all the Uticans, that he might receive them into a place clear both of enemies and barbarians. This Cato thought utterly cruel and barbarous, but he mildly answered he would consult the 300. Then he returned to the city, where he found the men not framing excuses or dissembling out of reverence to him, but openly declaring that no one should compel them to make war against Caesar, which, they said, they were neither able nor willing to do. And some there were who muttered words about retaining the senators till Caesar's coming, but Cato seemed not to hear this, as indeed he had the excuse of being a little deaf. At the same time came one to him and told him the horse were going away, and now fearing lest the 300 should take some desperate resolution concerning the senators, he presently went out with some of his friends, and seeing they were gone some way, he took horse and rode after them. They, when they saw him coming, were very glad and received him very kindly, entreating him to save himself with them. At this time, it is said, Cato shed tears while entreating them on behalf of the senators, and stretching out his hands in supplication, he turned some of their horses' heads, and laid hold of the men by their armor, till in fine he prevailed with them out of compassion to stay only that one day, and to procure a safe retreat for the senators. Having thus persuaded them to go along with him, some he placed at the gates of the town, and to others gave the charge of the citadel. The 300 began to fear that they should suffer their inconsistency, and sent to Cato entreating him by all means come to them, But the senators flocking about him would not suffer him to go, and said they would not trust their guardian and savior to the hands of the perfidious traitors, for there had never perhaps been a time when Cato's virtue appeared more manifestly, and every class of man in Utica could clearly see with sorrow and admiration how entirely free was everything that he was doing from any secret motives or any mixture of self-regard. Well, even if it's selfless, they tend to know, well, it's good for me to do this, and therefore self-regard. But he, namely, who had long before resolved on his own death, was taking such extreme pains, toil, and care, only for the sake of others, that when he had secured their lives, he might put an end to his own, for it was easily perceived that he had determined to die, though he did not let it appear. Therefore, having pacified the senators, he complied with the request of the 300, and went to them alone without any attendants. They gave him many thanks, and entreated him to employ and trust them for the future, and if they were not Cato's, and could not aspire to his greatness of mind, they begged he would pity their weakness, and told him they had determined to send to Caesar, and to entreat him chiefly and in the first place for Cato, and if they could not prevail for him, they would not accept a pardon for themselves, but as long as they had breath, would fight in his defense. Cato commended their good intentions, and advised them to send speedily for their own safety, but by no means to ask anything in his behalf, for those who are conquered entreat, and those who have done wrong beg pardon. For himself, he did not confess to any defeat in all his life, but rather, so far as he had thought fit, he had got the victory, and had conquered Caesar in all points of justice and honesty. It was Caesar that ought to be looked upon as one surprised and vanquished, for he was now convicted and found guilty of those designs against his country, which is so long practiced and so constantly denied. Stomach's been upset. When he had thus spoken, he went out of the assembly, and being informed that Caesar was coming with his whole army, "Ah," said he expects to find us brave men." Then he went to the senators, and urged them to make no delay, but hasten to be gone while the horsemen were yet in the city. So ordering all the gates to be shut, except one towards the sea, he assigned their several ships to those that were to depart, and gave money and provisions to those that wanted, all which he did with great order and exactness, taking care to suppress all tumults, and that no wrong should be done to the people. Marcus Octavius, coming with 2 legions, now encamped near Utica, sent to Cato to arrange about the chief command. Cato returned him no answer, but said to his friends, "Can we wonder all has gone ill with us, when our love of office survives even in our very ruin?" In the meantime, word was brought him that the horse were going away, and were beginning to spoil and plunder the citizens. Cato rendered them, and from the first he met snatched what they had taken. The rest threw down all they had gotten, and went away silent and ashamed of what they had done. Then he called all the people of Utica, and requested them, upon the behalf of the 300, not to exasperate Caesar against them, but all to seek their common safety together with them. After that he went again into the port to see those who were about to embark, and there he embraced and dismissed those of his friends and acquaintance whom he had persuaded to go. As for his son, he did not counsel him to be gone, nor did he think fit to persuade him to forsake his father. But there was one Statilius, a young man, in the flower of his age, of a brave spirit, and very desirous to imitate the constancy of Cato, Cato entreated him to go away, as he was a noted enemy to Caesar, but without success. Then Cato looked at Apollonius, the Stoic philosopher, and Demetrius, the Peripatetic. It belongs to you to cool the fervor of this young man's spirit, and to make him know what is good for him. And thus, in setting his friends upon their way, and in dispatching the business of any that applied to him, he spent that night and the greatest part of the next day. Lucius Caesar, a kinsman of Caesar's, being appointed to go deputy for the 300, came to Cato, and desired he would assist him to prepare a persuasive speech for them. And as to you yourself, he said, it will be an honor for me to kiss the hands and fall at the knees of Caesar in your behalf. But Cato would by no means permit him to do any such thing. For as to myself, said he, if I would be preserved by Caesar's favor, I should myself go to him, but I would not be beholden to a tyrant for his acts of tyranny, for it is but usurpation in him to save, as their rightful lord, the lives of men over whom he has no title to reign. But if you please, let us consider what you had best say for the 300. And when they had continued some time together, as Lucius was going away, Cato recommended to him his son and the rest of his friends, and taking him by the hand, bade him farewell. Then he retired to his house again, and called together his sons and his friends, to whom he conversed on various subjects. Among the rest, he forbade his son to engage himself in the affairs of state, for to act therein as became him was now impossible, and to do otherwise would be dishonorable. Toward evening he went into his bath, and he was bathing. He remembered Statilius, and called out loud, Apollonius, have you tamed the high spirit of Statilius? And is he gone without bidding us farewell? No, said Apollonius, I have said much to him, but to little purpose. He is still resolute and unalterable, and declares he is determined to follow your example. At this, it is said, Cato smiled and answered, that will soon be tried. After he had bathed, he went to supper, with a great deal of company, at which he sat up, as he had always used to do ever since the battle of Pharsalia. For since that time he never lay down, but when he went to sleep, there supped with him all his own friends and the magistrates of Utica. After supper, the wine produced a great deal of lively and agreeable discourse, and a whole series of philosophical questions was discussed. At length they came to the strange dogmas of the Stoics, called their paradoxes, and to this in particular, that the good man only is free, and that all wicked men are slaves. Now, if you practice it, then you'll understand it better. The Peripatetic, as was to be expected. Opposing this, Cato fell upon him very warmly, and somewhat raising his voice, he argued the matter at great length, and urged the point with such vehemence that it was apparent to everybody that he was resolved to put an end to his life. All these people killing themselves, don't do that, and set himself at liberty. And so, when he had done speaking, there was a great silence and evident dejection. Cato, therefore, to divert them from any suspicion of his design, turned the conversation, and began to talk of matters of present interest and expectation, showing great concern for those that were at sea, as also for the others who, traveling by land, were to pass through a dry and barbarous desert. When the company was broke up, he walked with his friends, as he used to do after supper, gave the necessary orders to the officers of the watch, and going into his chamber, he embraced his son and every one of his friends with more than usual warmth, which again renewed their suspicion of his design. Then, laying himself down, he took into his hand Plato's dialogue concerning the soul. Having read more than half the book, he looked up, and missing his sword, which his son had taken away while he was at supper, he called his servant and asked who had taken away his sword. The servant making no answer, he fell to reading again, and a little after, not seeming importunate or hasty for it, but as if he would only know what had become of it, he bade it be brought. But having waited some time, when he had read through the book, still nobody brought the sword, he called up all his servants, and in a louder tone demanded the sword. One of them he gave such a blow in the mouth that he hurt his own hand, and now grew more angry, exclaiming that he was betrayed and delivered naked to the enemy by his son and his servants. Then his son, with the rest of his friends, came running into the room, and falling at his feet, began to lament and beseech him. But Cato, raising himself and looking fiercely, "When," said he, "and how did I become deranged and out of my senses, that thus no one tries to persuade me by reason, or show me what is better? If I am supposed to be ill-advised, must I be disarmed and hindered from using my own reason? And you, young man, why do you not bind your father's hands behind him, that, when Caesar comes, he may find me unable to defend myself? To dispatch myself, I want no sword. I need but hold my breath a while, or strike my head against the wall." When he had thus spoken, his son went weeping out of the chamber, and with him all the rest, except Demetrius and Apollonius, to whom, being left alone with him, he began to speak more calmly. "And you," said he, "do you also think to keep a man of my age alive by force, and to sit here and silently watch me? Or do you bring me some reasons to prove that it will not be base and unworthy for Cato, when he can find his safety no other way, to seek it from his enemy? If so, adduce your arguments, and show cause why we should now unlearn what we formerly were taught, in order that, rejecting all the convictions in which we lived, we may now, by Caesar's help, grow wiser, and be yet more obliged to him for life only. Not that I have determined aught concerning myself, but I would have it in my power to perform what I shall think fit to resolve, and I shall not fail to take you as my advisers, in holding counsel, as I shall do, with doctrines which your philosophy teaches. In the meantime, do not trouble yourselves, but go tell my son that he should not compel his father to what he cannot persuade him to." They made him no answer, but went weeping out of the chamber. And thus the sword being brought in by a little boy, Cato took it, drew it out, and looked at it. And when he saw the point was good, "Now," said he, "I am master myself." And laying down the sword, he took his book again, which, it is related, he read twice over. After this he slept so soundly that he was heard to snore by those that were without. About midnight he called up 2 of his freedmen, Clinthus, Cleanthus, Cleanthus, his physician, and Buttus, whom he chiefly employed in public business. Him he sent to the port to see if his friends had sailed. To the physician he gave his hand to be dressed, as it was swollen with the blow he had struck one of his servants. At this they all rejoiced, hoping that now he designed to live. Buttus, after a while, returned, and brought word they were all gone except Crassus, who had stayed about some business, but was just ready to depart. He said also that the wind was high, and the sea very rough. Cato, on hearing this, sighed out of compassion to those that were at sea, and sent Buttus again to see if any of them should happen to return for anything they wanted, and to acquaint him therewith. Now the birds began to sing, and he again fell into a little slumber. At length Buttus came back and told him all was quiet in the port. Then Cato, laying himself down, as if he would sleep out of the rest of the night, bade him shut the door after him. But as soon as Buttus was gone out, he took his sword and stabbed it into his breast. Yet not being able to use his hand so well on account of the swelling, he did not immediately die of the wound, but struggling, fell off the bed, and throwing down a little mathematical table that stood by, made such a noise that the servants, hearing it, cried out. And immediately his son and all his friends came to the chamber, where, seeing him lie weltering in his blood, great part of his bowels out of his body, but himself still alive and able to look at them, they all stood in horror. The physician went to him, and would have put in his bowels, which were not pierced, and sewed up the wound, but Cato, recovering himself, and understanding the intention, thrust away the physician, plucked out his own bowels, and tearing open the wound, immediately expired. In less time than one would think, his own family could have known this accident. All the 300 were at the door, and a little after, the people of Attica flocked thither, crying out with one voice, he was their benefactor and their savior, the only free and undefeated man. At the very same time, they had news that Caesar was coming, yet neither fear of the present danger, nor desire to flatter the conqueror, nor the commotions and discord among themselves could divert them from doing honor to Cato, for they sumptuously set out his body, made him a magnificent funeral, and buried him by the seaside, where now stands his statue, holding a sword. And only when this had been done, they returned to consider of preserving themselves and their city. Caesar had been informed that Cato stayed at Attica and did not seek to fly, that he sent away the rest of the Romans, but he himself, with his son and a few of his friends, continued there very unconcernedly, so that he could not imagine what might be his design. But having a great consideration for the man, he hastened thither with his army. When he learned of his death, it is related, he said these words, Cato, I grudge you your death, as you have grudged me the preservation of your life. And indeed, if Cato would have suffered himself to owe his life to Caesar, he would not so much have impaired his own honor as augmented the other's glory. What would have been done, of course, we cannot know, but from Caesar's usual clemency, we may guess what was most likely. Cato was 48 years old when he died. His son suffered no injury from Caesar, but it is said he grew idle and was thought to be dissipated among women. In Cappadocia, he stayed at the house of Mithridates, one of the royal family there, but who had a very handsome wife, and continuing his visit longer than was suitable, he made himself the subject of various epigrams, such as, for example, tomorrow, being the 30th day, Cato, 'tis thought, will go away. Porcius, Mithridates, friends so true, one soul, they say, suffices for the two, that being the name of the woman. And so again, to Cato's greatness, every one confesses, a royal soul he certainly possesses, that being the name of the woman. And so again, is not part of the epigrams. But all these stains were entirely wiped off by the bravery of his death. For in the battle of Philippi, where he fought for his country's liberty against Caesar and Antony, when the ranks were breaking in, he, scorning to fly, or to escape unknown, called out to the enemy, showed himself to them in front, and encouraged those of his party who stayed, and at length fell, and left his enemies full of admiration for his valor. Nor was the daughter of Cato inferior to the rest of her family for sober living and greatness of spirit. She was married to Brutus, who killed Caesar, was acquainted with the conspiracy, and ended her life as became one of her birth and virtue. How is it virtue to carry on the family tradition of killing yourself? That's, anyways, I mean, it's deserved that sort of laugh, but all which is related in the life of Brutus Statilius, who said he would imitate Cato, was at that time hindered by the philosophers when he would have put an end to his life. He afterwards followed Brutus, to whom he was very faithful and very serviceable, and died in the field of Philippi. Now, a lot of people are super conservative about the whole philosophy thing, because they're like, no, philosophy is not quotes. But if you're moved to believe or do what's right, as a way of speaking, because of some quote, sure. But being convinced by the idea and you follow along with the logic, that's what philosophy is about, right?